Today we begin Book 2, The Aspirant Who Longs for Liberation, On Shukadeva. What we're going to discover in this section is very important. As a human being, we have a special ability not found in any other animal in the physical 3D universe. We have something called the pineal gland. The pineal gland looks like a little tiny pine cone in the center of the brain. The one thing our global elite agents of destruction have been working on for many years, maybe 70 years in the United States at least, is blocking our ability to connect with the pineal gland. They use fluoride in the water as a major effort to calcify the pineal gland. When the pineal gland is no longer operational, we cannot connect with the silent witness. That's what separates us from human beings as human beings and all the other animals. So we have to guard that ability to connect with the silent witness. It is the most precious thing. It's what makes us human beings. The latest effort is the mRNA vaccination, so-called vaccination. That one's going to do a lot of things, but mainly, most importantly, it's going to totally calcify the pineal gland and turn that very important portal connecting us from the conscious thinking mind into our subtle mind, the subconscious mind. And there we can make our contact with the silent witness. It's what we've been hearing about in all the movies about zombies and everything. So what is a zombie? It's a living, the walking dead kind of concept. It's real. This is what they want. Turn every human being into a humanoid robot. They have all the little ingredients ready, including the 5G, which is the connection to the internet, so that we can become one of the Internet of Things. Chapter 1, the liberation of Shukadeva, his need for confirmation. After Ram delivered his speech before the assembly, sage Vishwamitra, who sat before Ram, tenderly said, "Ram, you are the best of the most intelligent, and you have nothing more to learn that you have not already come to know by your own observation. You have understanding clear like a mirror, and your questions serve to polish and reflect your understanding to others. You have a mind like that of Shuka, the son of great Vyasa, who, knowing the knowable by intuition, was yet in need of some teaching to confirm his belief. Ram said, how was it that Shuka, the son of the great Vyasa, did not at first rest assured of his knowledge of the knowable, but then came to be settled in his belief? Vishwamitra replied, hear me relate to you, Ram, the story of Shukadeva, whose case was exactly like yours. The narration of this story prevents future births. As we continue, watch for all the references to connecting with the silent witness. Vishwamitra speaking. There is the great Vyasa sitting on his seat of gold by your father's side, swarthy in his complexion like a coal black hill, but blazing in brilliance like the burning sun. His son, named Shuka, was a boy of great learning and wisdom, of a moon-like countenance, with a stature sedate as a sacrificial altar. Like you, he reflected in his mind on the vanity of worldly affairs and became equally indifferent to all its concerns. It was then that this great-minded youth was led by his own discriminative understanding to a long inquiry after what was true, which he found at last by his own investigation. Having obtained the highest truth, he was still unsettled in his mind and could not trust his own knowledge. His mind grew indifferent to the perceptions of the transitory enjoyments of the world, and like Shataka cuckoos, thirsted only after the dewdrops of heavenly bliss. Once upon a time, the clear-sighted Shuka, finding his father, sage Krishna Dvayapayana Vyasa, sitting quietly alone, he reverently asked him, tell me, O sage, where does this commotion of the world arise, and how can it subside? What is its cause? How far does it extend, and where is its end? Sage Vyasa, who knew the nature of the soul, began being asked by his son, explained to him clearly all that was to be said. Shuka thought that he already knew all this by his good understanding and therefore did not think much of his father's instructions. Vyasa, understanding the thoughts of his son, replied that he himself knew no better than his son about the true nature of these things, but there was a king in this land named Janaka, who well knew the knowledge of the knowable, and from whom Shuka could learn everything. This is an interesting statement. Comes up quite often when the ego is in charge, as it was in the case of Shuka. It's clear that the ego of Shuka asked his father, tell me, O sage, where does this connection of the world arise and how can it subside? And Vyasa, being an enlightened individual, having the ability to spontaneously know the thoughts in the mind of another, realized, this young man comes to me with his ego in front, and therefore he thinks he knows all and that I know nothing, because I am, after all, only his father. So I will send him to someone else. This will throw the ego off. The ego always anxious to learn something new. And in that learning of something new, perhaps, we'll be able to balance those last karmic traces so he can get beyond his ego. Verse 19. Being thus directed by his father, Shuka went to the city of Videha at the foot of Mount Sumeru, which city was under the rule of Janaka. The doorkeeper informed the high-minded Janaka of his coming, telling him that Shuka, the son of Vyasa, was waiting at the gate. Janaka, who understood that Shuka had come to learn from him, gave no heed to the news, but held his silence for 7 days afterward. You see, Janaka also knew, here comes the ego of Shuka, wanting to learn from me. So he made the conscious decision, I will make him wait. This irritates the ego more than anything. And he knew that. And by irritating the ego, what it does is it kind of wakes up the karmic traces and brings them to the surface, those that are still operating there to keep the ego alive. So it'll be more effective when he does begin to speak to him in the balancing of those karmic traces. Verse 22. The king then ordered Shuka to be brought to the outer compound, where he had to remain irritated in spirit for 7 more days. Irritated in spirit. That's one way to describe the ego. Shuka was then commanded to enter the inner apartment, where he continued a week more without seeing the king. Here, Janaka entertained the moon-faced Shuka with an abundance of food, perfumes, and lusty maidens. But neither those vexations nor these entertainments could affect the tenor of Shuka's mind, which remained firm as a rock against the blast of the wind. He remained there like the full moon, tranquil in his desires, silent and contented in his mind. King Janaka, having come to know the disposition of Shuka's mind, had him brought to his presence. Foreseeing the complacency of his soul, he rose up and bowed down to him. Janaka said, "You have accomplished to the full all your duties in this world, and you have obtained the object of your heart's desire to its utmost extent. What do you now desire, for which you are welcome from me?" Shuka said, "Tell me, my guide, what is the source of all this bustle of worldly life? And tell me also how it may soon subside." Vishwamitra said, being thus asked by Shuka, Janaka told him the same things he had learned from the great soul that is his father. Shuka then said, "All this I have come to know. long before by my own intuition and then from the speech of my Father in answer to my question. You, sage, who are the most eloquent of all, have spoken to the same effect. And the same is found to be the true meaning of the scriptures. That the world is a creation of will and loses itself with the absence of our desires, and that it is an accursed and unsubstantial world after all, are the conclusions arrived at by all sages. Now tell me truly, O long-armed prince, so that you may set my mind, may be set at rest from its wandering all about the world. What do you think this world to be? Janaka replied, there is nothing more certain, O sage, than what you know by yourself and have heard from your Father. There is but one undivided, intelligent spirit known as the universal soul, and nothing else. It becomes confined by its desires, mental conditioning, and becomes freed by lack of them. You have truly come to the knowledge of the knowable, whereby your great soul has desisted from attachment to objects of enjoyment and vision. You must be a hero who have overcome your desires for the lengthening chain of attractive enjoyments while still in your early youth. What more do you want to hear? Even your father, with all his learning in every science and his devotion to austerities, has not arrived to the state of perfection like you. I am a student of Vyasa, and you are his son, but by your abandonment of the taste for the enjoyments of life, you are greater than both of us. You have obtained whatever is obtainable by the comprehension of your mind. You take no interest in the outer and visible world, so you are liberated from it and have nothing to doubt. Thus, being advised by the magnanimous Janaka, Shuka remained silent with his mind fixed in the purely supreme object. Being devoid of sorrow and fear and released from all efforts, exertions, and doubts, he went to a peaceful summit of Mount Meru to obtain his final absorption. There he passed 10,000 years of unalterable meditation until at last he broke his mortal coil and was extinguished in the Supreme Soul like a lamp without oil. Thus purified from the stain of rebirth by abstention from earthly desires, the great soul Shuka sank into the holy state of the Supreme Spirit, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Just like a drop of water mixes with the waters or merges into the depth of the ocean. So what has happened here? All that was needed was for him to hear that he was really great. He was greater than everyone. He was the greatest. And that seemed to be enough for him to spend 10,000 years in meditation and merge into the depths of Supreme Spirit. – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – Vishwamitra said, Rama, now it is appropriate that you have your mind properly purified from its doubts, as it was done with Shuka, the son of Vyasa. You see, O great sages, how perfectly the knowable is known to Ram, whose good understanding has learned to feel a distaste for worldly enjoyments as if they were diseases to him. You well know the fixed principles in the mind of one knowing the knowable is to have an aversion to all the enjoyments of life. The desire of results chains a man to the earth. Knowledge of the frailties here serves to dispel his darkness. Ram knows that curtailing desires is what the wise call liberty, and the attachment of our desires to earthly objects is our confinement here. Spiritual knowledge is easily obtained by most men, but a distaste for pleasurable objects is hard to be had. He who fully comprehends a thing is said to know it, and whoso knows what is knowable is called a learned man. No earthly enjoyment can be delectable to such high-minded men. The mind has no zest for earthly pleasures, except the glory of disinterested deeds. It is said to be liberated in the present life. But here we're beginning to see the elements of the silent witness appearing. Now remember, we're dealing with the ego of Ram, with the ego of Shuka. We cannot talk to the ego. We can't communicate with the ego. We have to help the individual, the person who is there behind the ego, as the silent witness, come to know himself. The first glimmer of self-realization can appear at this stage. So we're looking for a way to get beyond the ego. Verse 9. As no vegetable grows in a sterile soil, no disinclination to worldliness grows until one comes to know the knowable reality. What is this knowable reality? Hence, know that this supporter of Raghu's race has truly known the knowable, which has made him disgusted with princely enjoyments. The divine karmic traces. That's what this knowable reality is. He has known the knowable. But what is knowable in this universe? As long as you're embedded in the universe, divine karmic traces make up that which is knowable. I tell you, great sages, that whatever Rama has come to know by his intuition requires confirmation by Vashishta for the tranquility of his mind. For this repose, Rama requires only a reliance upon the unity, just as the beauty of autumn descends upon clear sky. So now we're seeing Ram is being instructed to rely upon the unity. And what is the unity? That is the silent witness. This is the only thing necessary. Once one has clearly perceived the divine karmic traces, one has to transcend the divine karmic traces. Going beyond them is the unity, the silent witness. Fortunately, for us, we do not have to go to the extraordinary lengths and have the incredible intelligence and intellect of Ram or Shuka and perceive the entirety of the divine karmic traces too. That's quite fortunate because we all have this connection with the unity, with the silent witness. And just by touching it from time to time, as we start our meditation or during our meditation, or sometimes during the day, we're becoming more and more attached to who we are. And the dawning of self-realization has begun. Let the Venerable Vasishta reason with the high-minded Ram and restore the peace of his mind. For he is the master and family teacher for the whole race of the Raghus. Besides, he is all-knowing and all-seeing with clear insight of the three times. Thus, addressing himself to Vasishta, Vishwamitra said, "Sage, you well remember the instruction given us of old for pacifying our mutual enmity and promoting the welfare of the high-minded sages. When our Lord, the lotus-born Brahma, seated on the tableland of Nishada Mountain and shaded by Sarala trees, delivered his wise lectures to us and the sages. Through that knowledge of liberation, our worldly desires are dispelled like the darkness of night by sunbeams. Now please, O Brahman, communicate that rational knowledge of the knowable to your student Ram, whereby he may gain the peace of his mind." Now, what does that mean? Gain the peace of his mind. The only thing that disturbs the peace of mind are individual karmic traces. Once we go beyond karmic traces, individual and even divine karmic traces, then we are there in the silent witness, which is the unity of all, which is the peace that is beyond all understanding. Kind of a famous statement, the peace that passes all understanding. Probably heard that. Chapter 19, or verse 19. It will not be difficult for you to teach the spotless Ram, whose mirror-like mind is quite clear to take the reflection. The wisdom of the holy, their learning of the scriptures, and the scholarship of the learned are only praiseworthy when they are communicated to a good student and those who are disgusted with the world. But instruction given to me, to one who is neither a student nor disgusted with the world, becomes as polluted as milk stored in a hide vessel. Again, the instruction given by one devoid of passions and affections, fear and anger, pride and sin, serves to infuse tranquility into the mind. At these words of Vishwamitra, the son of Gadi, the assembled sages, Vyasa, Narada, and others honored his speech with exclamations of bravo, well said, and the like. Then the venerable Vasishta, brilliant like Brahma, his father, and sitting by the side of the king, spoke in reply. O sage, I will perform what you have commanded me to do without fail. For who, though mighty, can refuse to perform the request of the good and wise? I will destroy the mental darkness of Prince Rama and others by the light of knowledge, just like we dispel the gloom of night by the light of a lamp. I will remember the instructions for dispelling the errors of the world that were given of yore by the lotus-born Brahma on Nishada mountain. Having said so, the high-minded Vasishta made up his mind, as one girds up his loins, to deliver his lecture to Ram in order to dispel his ignorance and show him the state of supreme joy. Chapter 3. Repeated creations of the world, repeated incarnations of the same personality. Vasishta said, Ram, I will now expound to you the knowledge that was imparted of old by the lotus-born Brahma for the peace of mankind after he created the world. Ram said, Sage, I know that you will expound to me the subject of liberation in full length. But first, remove my false ideas about the frailty of this world. How was it that the great sage Vyasa, the father and guide of Shuka, with all his omniscience, did not obtain disembodied emancipation when his son did? Vasishta said, there is no counting the atoms that proceed from the spirit and form the three worlds, both before and after the birth of the glorious sun. There is nobody who can even count the millions of orbs that form the three worlds. Nor can anyone calculate what numbers of creation will rise from the ocean of divine existence like endless waves. Ram said, it is needless to talk of the worlds gone by or yet to come. Speak of the present. Vasishta said, this world consists of brute, human, and heavenly beings, whose lives, when they are said to perish in any part of it, really exist in the same part. The mind is described as ever fluctuating. In itself, it gives rise to everything in the three worlds. It resides in a void in the form of the heart. And the uncreated also resides in the empty space of the soul, giving the mind the power to realize the latent ideas of the soul. The millions of beings who are dead those who are dying and will die hereafter, are all to be reborn here according to the different desires of their minds. The external world appears as a reality, but in truth, it is only a creation of our desires. It is an ideal castle in the air, and a magic view spread before us. It is as false as an earthquake in a fit of delirium, like a hobgoblin shown to terrifying children, like a string of pearls in the clear sky, and like trees on a bank appear moving to a passenger in a boat. It is an illusion, like the phantom of a city in a dream, and as untrue as the imagination of a flower growing in the air. It is at the point of death and afterwards that the unreality of the world best appears. But this knowledge of the unreality of the world becomes darkened upon being reborn on earth, when the shadow of this world again falls on the mirror of the sentient soul. Thus there is a struggle for repeated births and deaths here, and a fancy for the next world after death. After he shuffles off his body, he assumes another, and then another form, and thus the world is as unstable as a stool made of plantain leaves and its coating. The dead have no sensation of the earth and other bodies made of the elements, or of the course of the world, but they fall again to these errors upon being reborn here. There is an interminable ignorance resembling an immense river enveloping the face of creation and breaking into streamlets of ignorance that are impossible to cross. Divinity, like a sea, shoots forth in various waves of creation that rise constantly and plentifully, one after the other. All beings here are only the waves of this sea. Some are alike to another in their minds and natures, while others are half alike, and some quite different from the rest. I reckon that sage Vyasa there, on account of his vast knowledge and good-looking appearance, is one of the 32 of these waves. There are 12 possessed of lesser understanding. They were the patriarchs of men and endued with equal energy. 10 were men of subdued spirit, and the rest were adepts in their family duties. There will be born again other Vyasas and Valmikis, and likewise some other Brigus and Girasas, as well as other Pulastyas and others in different forms. All other men, asuras and gods, with all their hosts, are repeatedly born and destroyed, either in their former or different shapes. Like this, there are 72 Trita cycles in a Kalpa age of Brahma, some of which have passed by and others to follow. Thus will there be other people like those who have gone by, and, as I understand, another Ram and Vashishta, like ourselves. There have been 10 successive incarnations of this Vyasa, who has done such wonderful deeds and is famed for his vast knowledge. Myself and Valmiki have been contemporaries many times, born in different ages, and very many times. We have been together many times. And there were others like myself. So was I also born in many forms, in many ages. This Vyasa will be born again 8 times hereafter, and he will again write his Mahabharata and the Purana histories. He will finally attain liberation from the body after he has divided the Vedas, described the acts of Bharata's race in the Mahabharata, and established the knowledge of Brahman in the Vedanta. This Vyasa, who is devoid of fear and sorrow, who has become tranquil and emancipate in himself after subduing his mind and discarding the worldly desires, is said to be liberated even in his present life. Those liberated in life may sometimes associate with relatives and estates his acts and duties, his knowledge and wisdom, and all his exertions, like those of any other men, or he may forsake them all at once. Those beings are being reborn 100 times in some age or never at all, as in the case of divine incarnations, depending on the inscrutable will, Maya, or illusion of God. Souls undergo great changes by repetition, like a bushel of grain that is collected only to be repeatedly sown, then reaped again and again. As the sea heaves in constant surges of different shapes, so all beings are born constantly in various forms in the vast ocean of time. The wise man who is liberated in this lifetime lives with his internal belief of God in a state of tranquility, without any doubt in his mind, and quite content with the ambrosia of equanimity. So again, we're given another insight into the silent witness, the underlying unity of all. Here it is called the ambrosia of equanimity. We're also given this interesting perspective that we keep going round and round and round and round, don't we? This dream in the mind of the creator Brahma continually repeats. Factually, on the basis of time in three-dimensional world, it repeats about every 8 million years. About 4 million years of dream and about 4 million years of not dream. These are the days and nights of Brahma. Okay, we'll stop there for today.